Hello friends of TV Agro, how are you? Nice to meet you. My name is Daniel Rivera. I am the creator of Vita Garden and today we are going to learn how to propagate succulents. Well, propagation is useful for many things. Basically because we have a favorite succulent and what we really want is to have more of it. But many times we also use it simply because we have a succulent that suffered a syndrome, and this basically occurs when we do not give the required direct sun exposure to a plant. This syndrome is called etiolation and it occurs as we can see in this plant. Basically, as I said, because it has not received the necessary amount of direct sun, and for that reason, instead of being very compact, it has been stretching. What happens is that the plant loses its natural shape and does not look the same. It is really difficult to correct this syndrome. So what we are going to do is to try to recover the upper part so that when it continues to grow, it will be able to grow in a more natural way, to do it in a compact way. So, the first thing that we are going to do today is that we are going to make a cut that is called decapitation, and basically it is because we are going to try to save the upper part, as I was mentioning. So, this simply serves us to know how we are going to do it. And in addition to that, when we want to propagate succulents, it will also be an excellent option. The first thing we are going to do is to determine where we are going to make the cut. It cannot be very close to where the plant is beginning to grow in a compact way, because we need a part of the stem where the plant can generate again its roots, and that this small part serves us to bury it in the substrate as such. So what we can do in this case is that we are going to remove some leaves of the plant that will also serve us to be able to propagate it. The most correct way to remove the leaves is simply holding it firmly and turning it to one side and to the other. When we do this, the leaf will come off very easily. It is important that you keep in mind that when you take them off, they should come out complete. There should not be any cuts or anything like that, because this will make the propagation process a little bit more difficult. As I was saying, these leaves are also very useful for propagation, so what we are going to do is simply get a plastic container, or whatever we have, and we are simply going to put it there. We are going to leave this container for about 10 days in a well-lit place, but without direct sunlight, and we are not going to water it. After that, we continue with our etiolated plant. We will check if we can remove other leaves. Remember to do it firmly, but gently, to prevent the stem from breaking, or that the leaf will also be a little cut. Here we can remove another leaf, and in this way we can see that it already has a part of the stem free, and from there we can make the cut. Keep in mind that when you are going to use any type of instrument to make the cut, the best thing to do is always to disinfect. So, in this case we are going to apply a little alcohol to avoid that any pathogen or any microorganism can enter the cut that is going to be made and end up damaging the plant. Once disinfected, we are going to make the cut. As soon as the cut is made, what we can observe here is the following. This as such is the core of the plant. It should always be green. In the case that we see it of another color, it can be a brown color. A dark color will be signs of rotting in the plant. In this case, the condition is a little more critical, and we must take it into account when we make the cutting. In this case, as we can see, the inside of the plant looks completely green. So it means that it is a plant that is in very good health. It does not have any symptoms of rot, nor any pest. After that, what we can do is to help ourselves with powdered sulfur. This can be obtained in some drugstore. And what we are going to do with it is that we are simply going to apply it on the two cuts that we made, in such a way that they cover all the internal zone of the plant. This sulfur will help us to prevent the plant, first, from getting any fungus. And the second one heals more easily. If you cannot get the powdered sulfur, you can also do it with powdered cinnamon. Once we make the cut, what we are going to do is that we can also put our plant in the little tray and leave it for about 10 to 15 days in a lighted place, but without direct sunlight. With what we have left of the plant, we will simply water it and we will return it to the place where it was. If it was outdoors, it is important to keep in mind that we must protect it from the rain, because you can make a cut, then it can also start a rotting process. Once 10 to 15 days have passed, what we are going to notice is that the plant begins to generate its own roots. That is the advantage of the manipulation of succulents that have the ability to readapt and can again produce roots. In addition to this, we can see that the cut is already as such healed. When we can see that these two factors are already successful, what we proceed to do is to planting the plant. Then, simply what we must take into account is to use a substrate that has enough minerals. In this case, we can observe that the substrate is not simply soil. Since the use of only soil, what it will do is that the plants are compacted and does not allow the roots to develop in a good way. In this case, the substrate that we handle in Vita Garden contains many minerals such as pumice stone, also brings perlite, arlite, quartz sand and vermiculite. All these minerals, what they do is to avoid that the substrate is finally compacted and will always be loose, as you can see. Then what we are going to do is simply to fill the pot with the substrate. Preferably that the substrate is dry during this process. And we are going to plant our plant. The plant, as it is beginning to generate its root system, is already possible to put it in exposure to the sun. Not for too many hours, because it is a plant that so far returns to the sun, adapt to the sun, and we can make the first irrigation. On the other hand, when the leaves have been ready, what we are going to do is that we are simply going to sow them. It can also be in a pot. Then in this case, what we would do would be simply to put them on the substrate so that the tip touches the substrate directly. Not all the plants are going to develop at the same speed, and this is important to keep in mind. Here we have, for example, a plant that has developed much faster from its leaf. Then, as we can see, the rosette of the plant is already forming as such, and in addition to that, it already has roots. This plant will successfully go ahead, and simply what we do if it already has roots is to bury the root a little bit. We press it a little bit against the substrate, and there it will continue to develop. Another method that we can also use is the reproduction in water. Basically, what we need is a small glass of water, a little vinipple plastic, and what we are going to do is that we are going to put it on top of the glass. we can help us with a rubber or a rubber band to adjust it a little. We tighten it, and with the help of a scalpel or a stitch, what we can do is make some small holes. These we are going to do in order to introduce there the leaves. What the water is going to do is stimulate the appearance of the roots on the leaves, so that in this way our propagation process will be successful. Once we make the holes, we will simply make sure that the tip of the plant's leaf is touching the water in this way. It is important that we always check the water, because sometimes it is enough to be in contact with the leaves. It can take a yellowish color. It can generate algae. That is to say that it will not look transparent as it looks at this moment, but it will look a little green. So, it is important that we take this into account to make the necessary water changes so that it always stays that way. In this way, we avoid the propagation of any type of fungus or pathogen inside the leaves, and we also leave it in a place where it gets plenty of light but without direct sunlight. Another option that we can also consider when we propagate. If it is not to save a plant in the case of the one we saw, we can simply make use of a seedbed to be able to propagate in greater quantity, and in this way make the whole process more effective. In addition to this, it is important to keep in mind that when this cut is made, it does not mean that simply this stem will not produce more plants. On the contrary, what it will do is that it will stimulate each of the leaves to produce its own plant. Here we are going to see an example in which the decapitation process was also carried out, precisely because it was also being etiolated. Once the decapitation process is done, the plant begins to produce new offspring. So in this way we do not simply propagate our plant, but we practically multiply it many times, and it is a process that can be done several times in order to obtain more plants. It is a very effective option if we want to start a venture. If we want to start propagating our plants, and when it is the seedling method, we will simply have a lot of very nice plants for our venture. Well friends, thank you very much for seeing us today. Remember that any questions you may have, you can consult our social networks. Thank you very much for being here, and see you another time.